Spider-Man Blue is one of the most emotional Spider-Man stories ever made. It was written by Jeph Loeb and drawn by Tim Sale, two creators who became known for telling superhero stories that felt more personal, more reflective, and more human than the average comic. This wasn't written to be the biggest Spider-Man battle story, it's written to be a memory story, a grief story. A story about Peter looking back on Gwen Stacy and realizing just how much she meant to him. Pay attention to how the comic uses soft, moody colors and quiet panel spacing. The art does not rush you, it feels like you're being pulled into a memory instead of dropped into an action scene. That's why this comic stands out so much. It takes Spider-Man, a character usually known for quips, villains, and action, and slows everything down. It lets the sadness breathe, it lets the quiet moments matter, and reminds you that Peter Parker's always been at his best when the story cares as much about his heart as it does about his powers. Look at Peter's face in the quieter panels. Tim Sale's art often gives him a slightly tired, thoughtful expression, which helps sell the idea that this is older Peter remembering a part of his life he can't fully let go of. Jeph Loeb wrote this comic as part of the same kind of character-focused storytelling he and Tim Sale became famous for. Their approach was simple but powerful. Take a hero everyone knows, strip away the noise, and tell a story that gets to the emotional core. That's exactly what Spider-Man Blue does. It's not really about a villain, it's about loss. It's about the things Peter can never fully let go of. And it's about Gwen Stacy, the person who still lives in his memory long after she's gone. So as we go issue by issue, pay attention to the expressions, the pauses, and the little details in the art. A lot of this comic's power comes from what's not being said out loud. Issue 1 sets the tone immediately. We open with Peter as an older man looking back on his past, and that framing matters a lot. It tells us from the start that this comic is about memory, not momentum. The story feels like Peter is sorting through his own life and trying to understand what Gwen meant to him, before time made everything harder to hold on to. The early pages are important because they establish the whole emotional rhythm of the book. A lot of panels are less about movement and more about stillness. That gives the story a heavy, nostalgic mood before anything big even happens. Nothing feels rushed. The tone is soft, reflective, and a little sad, which is exactly what this story needs. Instead of starting with a huge fight, the comic starts with feeling. That's a huge part of why it works. When the story starts pulling us into the flashbacks, that shift is really important. We're leaving the older Peter behind for a while and stepping into the version of him who still had Gwen in his life. That contrast is the whole point. It lets the comic show us what Peter had, what he lost, and why he still carries that loss with him. The empty room, the thoughtful expression, the stillness of Peter's pose, all of that is doing emotional work. The comic is saying, before you understand the love story, you need to understand the grief. The flashbacks often feel a little brighter or softer compared to the present day framing. That contrast is a visual clue that these are memories, not just scenes. Issue 2 starts showing us why Gwen mattered so much. This is where the comic slows down and lets Peter and Gwen feel like a real couple instead of just part of Spider-Man history. Gwen is warm, intelligent, and alive on the page. She feels like someone Peter actually belongs with, which is why the later sadness hits so hard. Pay attention to how Gwen is framed in relation to Peter. In the better relationship scenes, the art gives them space to feel connected, sometimes through posture, sometimes through shared panel rhythm, sometimes through softer expression. This issue is also where the split in Peter's life becomes more obvious. He wants to be present with Gwen, but he's still Spider-Man, and that means he's also carrying around secrets and responsibilities. That tension is one of the most important things in any Spider-Man story. Peter can care deeply about someone and still not fully be able to live normally with them. In scenes where Peter is torn between being a boyfriend and being Spider-Man, look for visual tension, a face turned away, a panel cut, or a posture that feels like he's mentally somewhere else. A glance, a smile, a slightly awkward conversation, the way Peter seems calmer around Gwen than he does anywhere else. Those details matter because the comic is built on small human moments, not giant plot twists. The relationship feels believable, and that makes it painful. The quiet expressions are everything here. A small smile or a thoughtful look can carry as much meaning as a big dramatic pose. It shows that Peter's life is never just one thing. He's always balancing between being a person and being a hero, and that balance never really works perfectly. That's part of what makes him such a compelling character. Issue 3 starts widening the emotional pressure. Now we're seeing more of the people around Peter, and the story becomes even more complicated. Mary Jane starts to matter more, and the comic makes it clear that Peter's life isn't just about one relationship. It's about all the emotional paths his life is trying to take at once. Look how the comic separates characters visually. When Peter is stuck between people or feelings, the panel often reflects that divide. That's a subtle way the art shows emotional conflict without having to say it out loud. This issue is important because it shows that Peter is always being pulled into different directions. He doesn't get to live a clean, simple life where one thing is resolved before the next begins. He's a teenager trying to hold on to love while also carrying the weight of being Spider-Man. That's hard enough on its own, but the comic makes it feel even heavier by showing how much he's trying to juggle at once. Tim Sale's art is doing a lot here. Even when the scenes are quiet, the emotional tension is visible in the characters' faces and posture. The story doesn't need giant speeches to tell you something is wrong or fragile. It just shows it. It's not just there to break up the drama. It reminds us that Peter's world is always dangerous and that danger affects every relationship he has. His love life and his hero life are never fully separate. The action scenes are usually expressive, not just flashy. Spider-Man's movements can look almost acrobatic and emotional at the same time, which is a big part of why the art works. Issue 4 turns the emotional volume up again. By this point, the comic is making it impossible to ignore how fragile Peter's happiness really is. The story isn't just remembering Gwen anymore, it's making us feel the weight of everything that can't be recovered. This is a great issue to point out the contrast between the softness of the romance scenes and the sharper energy of Spider-Man's world. The art keeps reminding us that the safety of ordinary life never lasts long for Peter. The art is emphasizing the strain he lives under. Peter may be a superhero, but that doesn't mean he has emotional peace. In fact, Spider-Man often means the opposite. More responsibility, more pain, more things to lose. Spider-Man is always in motion, always reacting, always trying to fix something before it falls apart. That chaos makes the quiet moments with Gwen feel even more precious. The comic is constantly contrasting danger with tenderness. Notice how the action doesn't erase the emotional tone. Even during conflict, the art still feels grounded in Peter's inner life. This issue is also a good place to remind the viewer that the real point of the book is not what happens in battle, it's what those battles cost Peter emotionally. That's what separates Spider-Man Blue from a standard superhero comic. Issue 5 is where the grief starts to feel heavier. Peter's memories begin to feel like less simple nostalgia and more like something he's still carrying around every day. That's what makes the comic so effective. It understands that loss doesn't end neatly. It sits there. It lingers. It becomes part of how you remember everything else. The pages here usually feel more reflective and emotionally open. Watch for scenes where the characters are drawn in softer light or calmer settings because those moments are meant to feel like memories you don't want to leave. This is the issue where I'd really talk about the emotional truth of the comic. Peter isn't just thinking about Gwen because he misses her, he's thinking about her because she represents a version of his life that changed forever. They are the memories Peter can't let go of, and because we've spent time with these moments, the sadness hits harder now. The comic is smart enough to know that the past only hurts when you understand what was good about it. Mary Jane's presence in this part becomes important too because it shows that Peter had to keep living. The world didn't stop for his grief, he kept moving, and that's part of the tragedy. He can love someone and still be forced forward by life. When Mary Jane appears, pay attention to how the art shifts the emotional energy. She helps show that Peter's life continues even when his heart is still tied to Gwen. Issue 6 is the payoff, and it lands because the comic has earned it. This is where everything the story's been building toward finally comes together emotionally. Peter isn't just remembering Gwen in a vague way anymore. He's facing what she meant to him and what her loss did to him. The most important thing about the ending is that it doesn't try to make grief disappear. It doesn't give Peter a clean emotional reset. Instead, it gives him something more honest, acceptance. He understands that Gwen will always be a part of him even though she's gone, and that's why the ending works so well. It doesn't say the pain is over, it says the pain became part of his life and that he found a way to keep going anyway. That's a much stronger ending than pretending everything can be fixed. Mary Jane's role here matters too, because she represents the fact that Peter is allowed to move forward without erasing the past. He doesn't betray Gwen by continuing to live, he carries her with him. That's one of the most mature and human ideas in the whole comic. And that's why Spider-Man Blue matters so much. It's a 6-issue comic, but it feels like one long emotional memory. Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale turned Spider-Man into something quieter and more intimate than most superhero stories, and that's why the book still resonates. The whole comic should be understood as a mood piece as much as a story. The colors, the expressions, the pacing, and the panel composition all work together to make you feel Peter's grief instead of just hearing about it. It shows that Peter Parker isn't just interesting because he swings through the city or fights villains. He's interesting because he loves deeply, loses deeply, and still keeps moving forward. That's what makes him Spider-Man. Not perfection, not invincibility, just the ability to keep going even when it hurts.